The prairie lay in silence that was not silence at all, but a gathering of whispers, wind scraping dry grass, wood settling in its old joints, the faint shuffle of horses shifting their weight in the dark. A storm brooded somewhere far off, its breath already staining the night with a copper scent. Miriam Johnson stood in the barn with a lantern cupped in her hand, the glow cutting across her face in uneven strokes. Her skin carried the story of sun and toil, her palms roughened, her shoulders broad from years of bending to tasks no one else would do for her. She had been bent before by chains and voices that called her less than human, but here, on this patch of stubborn soil, she stood unbent. She fed the animals slowly, almost reverently, as if they, too, were weary travelers in a land that did not welcome them. The barn smelled of straw and sweat, leather and dust. Outside, the world felt too large, but here she could breathe. The lantern flame quivered with each draft that slipped through the wooden slats, and she felt the same shiver beneath her ribs. He should have been home by now. Zeke rode out 3 days ago, saying little as always, only promising he would return before the moon changed. She trusted his word, yet the road had a way of swallowing men whole, and the land took its tithe without asking. A sound broke through her thoughts, boots crunching against dirt, low voices tangled with laughter that did not belong to any friend. Miriam froze, her lantern lowered, heart clenching. The horses stirred uneasily, picking up the tremor in her blood. The barn door groaned open without her permission, and 4 figures stepped into the lantern's reach. Their shadows stretched long, distorted across the floor, like predators taking shape. The eldest of them, red-faced from drink and arrogance, held himself like a man who believed the world already his. Behind him trailed 3 younger men, their cheeks still tender with youth but hardened by cruelty. They smelled of cheap whiskey and unwashed travel, and their eyes glinted when they fell on Miriam, first with curiosity, then something sharper. "Well, now," the leader drawled, pulling off his hat and swiping sweat from his brow. "Didn't reckon this barn came with company." Miriam said nothing. Her silence was both shield and weapon, though she felt their gazes crawling over her like ants on skin. One of the younger men kicked a bucket, letting the clang echo too loud. Another muttered something low, a word she had heard her whole life, a word meant to strip her down. Her jaw tightened. She set the lantern on a beam, its glow steady though her breath was not. The leader gestured to hay. "Storm's comin'. We'll be bunkin' here tonight." "This is my barn," Miriam replied, her voice quiet but firm, each word nailed down like a plank in the floor. The man smirked, looking around as if to dismiss her claim. "Barn don't belong to no one who can't keep it." His boys laughed at that, a sound as thin and jagged as broken glass. She kept her eyes on them, though her fingers itched toward the carving knife on the workbench. Her husband's tools hung on the wall, silent witnesses, each one shaped for cutting, breaking, bending the world into order. But his guns were not here. Only her and her knife, and the steel of her will. One of the younger settlers, bold with liquor, stepped closer. His boots left prints in the straw, pressing down like he meant to claim even the ground she stood on. "You out here alone, woman?" he asked, voice heavy with suggestion. Miriam steadied her breathing. She thought of Zeke, the calm in his eyes, the violence coiled beneath it like a rattlesnake. She thought of his promise, his vow that no harm would touch her as long as his shadow walked beside hers. Yet he was not here now. She lifted her chin, letting them see no fear though her pulse hammered. "My husband's on his way," she said, each syllable measured. Laughter broke out, raw and mocking. The leader spat into the hay. "Ain't no man worth his salt leave a woman alone out here. Either he's dead or he's a coward." The words hung in the air like smoke. Miriam did not answer. She only held the gaze of the man who had spoken, letting him see a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. The younger ones shifted uneasily under it, though they covered their discomfort with swagger. The men spread out in the barn, claiming corners, laying down as though her word meant nothing. Miriam stood still, knife now in her hand, hidden by her skirt. She whispered under her breath, words from a time before this place, before freedom came dressed in the rags of fear. A prayer, a plea, or perhaps a promise. The lantern sputtered, and shadows grew long across the walls. One of the horses snorted, pawing the ground as though it sensed the tension thickening like a storm cloud. The men's laughter dulled into mutters, then into silence as drink dragged them toward sleep. Yet Miriam did not lower the knife, nor did her heartbeat ease. She kept her eyes on the door, on the dark stretch of road beyond. Somewhere out there, hoofbeats echoed faint but certain, carrying with them the weight of return. The night deepened into a hush broken only by the groans of timber and the steady rasp of drunken snoring. Miriam stayed near the lantern, the knife still slick in her palm. Sleep did not dare come to her eyes. Her breath was a quiet rhythm against the heavier sound of the intruders sprawled across her hay. They had claimed her barn as if it were theirs by right, their boots muddying her floor, their laughter still clinging to the rafters like smoke. She had spent years fighting for every inch of dignity in this life, and now it felt thin again, fragile as glass. Yet beneath her fear burned a coal of defiance. She would not shatter. Far down the road, a rider approached. The sound was faint, but the prairie carried it, a hollow thunder of hooves against earth. Zeke crossed road without hurry, yet with certainty, as though he had already measured the night and knew where it would lead. His shoulders were heavy beneath the dusted coat, his hat shadowing eyes that had stared too long into gun barrels and never flinched. To most men he was no more than a rumor with blood on its boots. A bounty hunter once, a soldier when pressed, an outlaw when cornered. To Miriam he was something else. Not gentler, not entirely safe, but bound to her as she was bound to him, each one holding the other's history like a fragile flame cupped against the wind. He saw the barn before he reached it, a square of weak light trembling in the dark. His horse shifted uneasily, sensing what waited inside. Zeke dismounted in silence, every move deliberate, his hand brushing the revolver at his side, not out of fear, but habit. The prairie was never kind to those who trusted chance. Inside, Miriam heard the creak of the barn door. Her chest tightened, though not with dread. Relief and fear braided together until she could scarcely breathe. He had come back. She set her knife down, but her eyes stayed sharp. Zeke's figure filled the doorway, his frame cutting a silhouette against the night behind him. The lantern caught the dust on his coat, the iron at his hip, the lines of the face carved from too many storms. He stood still, taking in the sight of strangers scattered in his barn. His silence was heavier than any shout. The men stirred, blinking blearily at the interruption. One of the younger ones laughed, mistaking Zeke for nothing more than a weary rider. Well, look what the wind dragged in. Another fool with nowhere better to be. The leader, older and meaner, sat up with a grunt, squinting at the stranger. This your place? Or you just wandering too? His voice carried the smugness of a man, convinced there was no danger left in the world for him. Zeke didn't answer. His eyes found Miriam first, and she gave him nothing but a steady look. That was enough. He read the whole story in her silence. One of the boys kicked straw aside, swaggering toward him. We already told the lady we're staying. Barn's ours tonight. He smirked, waiting for some reaction. Zeke's gaze finally moved. It landed on the boy with a stillness more threatening than a drawn gun. He didn't speak, not yet. The boy faltered, but covered it with a laugh. Don't give me that look, old man. Ain't like you can scare us. The leader dragged himself to his feet, squaring his shoulders. What's your business here? Zeke's reply was soft, gravel in the throat of the night. This is my barn. The words shifted the air. Miriam felt it first, the ripple of certainty, like a storm cloud suddenly showing its lightning. The settlers exchanged glances, their bravado thinning. The youngest whispered, Z-Cross, as if testing a memory he wished he hadn't recalled. The name passed through them like a knife. They had heard in saloons, in whispers along the trail. Tales of a man who had outdrawn half a dozen, of bodies left cooling under desert stars. A man no lawman had claimed and no outlaw had bested. The leader tried to laugh, though it rang false. Ain't no way. He's dead or long gone. Zeke stepped further into the barn, his boots grinding against the straw, each step deliberate. His face remained unreadable, but his presence pressed against him like the weight of a mountain. He removed his hat, shook the dust from it, and hung it on a nail as though these men were already forgotten. Then he looked at them again, and no one mistook the meaning. The youngest of the settlers spat, masking his unease. Legends don't scare me. Ain't no man can be that dangerous. His hand twitched toward the knife at his belt. Zeke didn't move for his gun. Instead, his voice, calm as a prayer, filled the barn. Son, you don't know what kind of ghosts ride with me. The boy froze. Miriam's heart hammered as silence folded over them. Even the animals had stilled, ears tilted toward the man. They knew better than to challenge. The leader squared his jaw, forcing steel into his tone. We ain't looking for trouble, just shelter. Zeke's eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker of disdain. You found trouble the moment you stepped through her door. His head inclined toward Miriam. The settlers followed his glance, and in that moment it became clear. The woman they had mocked was not alone, not unguarded. She was bound to a man the earth itself seemed to fear. The drunkest of the boys broke the silence with nervous bluster. So what now? You gonna shoot us where we stand? Zeke's gaze lingered on him, then shifted back to Miriam, softer for a heartbeat. When he spoke, his words carried no heat, only cold certainty. You boys best start praying. The Lord loves fools. 'Cause I don't. The leader's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. His men shuffled, unease breaking through their bravado. No one reached for a weapon. Not yet. Miriam stood with her back straight, the knife forgotten on the bench, her breath steadier now. Fear still pulsed through her, but it was laced with something else. Trust in the man who had returned, the man she loved despite the darkness that clung to him. Yet in the pit of her stomach she knew this night was not finished. Zeke's presence had stayed their hands, but pride and hatred were not so easily silenced. They would not leave without pressing the matter further. The lantern flame guttered as if to underline the thought. Shadows stretching long across the walls. Zeke remained still, watchful, a mountain waiting for the storm to strike. The men shifted restlessly, their laughter gone, their courage shrinking in the face of the legend come alive. The air in the barn grew tight, wound with threads of dread and inevitability. Miriam could feel it settling on her skin like ash, the knowledge that dawn would not pass without blood. The barn held its breath, dawn still hours away, the only light a trembling lantern flame that painted everything in amber and shadow. Miriam's hand stayed folded tight against her skirts, her nails biting into her palms. She stood close enough to Zeke to feel the iron steadiness in him, the calm before something inevitable. The settlers shifted restlessly, their earlier bravado leaking away with each heartbeat, yet pride clung stubborn as burrs. The leader's eyes darted between Zeke and Miriam, caught between disbelief and recognition. The youngest, the one who had spat words meant to cut, stepped forward again, his youth making him reckless. His voice cracked but pushed through. You think just 'cause folks whisper your name, we ought to scatter like scared dogs. He gripped the knife at his belt, though his hand trembled. Zeke regarded him with the same patience. He might give a rattler coiled too close to his boots. His voice was low, steady. Boy, the stories don't matter. It's the graves behind me that do. The words stung the air. Miriam closed her eyes a moment, remembering the night she first saw him. Half dead, covered in blood, not all his own, collapsing at her threshold. She had nursed him back, watched him wake with eyes that carried too many ghosts. She had seen the man behind the legend, the one who whispered her name with a reverence no one else ever had. She feared that man would vanish again if the gun in his hand found its voice tonight. The leader raised a hand to still his boys, though it was not respect that moved him but calculation. We don't want blood, just a place to sleep and a little food. Ain't more than any man's due. Miriam's anger flared sharp and sudden. Due. Her voice cut the stillness. What's due to you is what you earn, not what you take. She surprised even herself with the force of it, and for a moment the barn belonged to her voice alone. The men shifted, uncomfortable at being rebuked by the woman they had mocked. The leader's mouth tightened. He spat, more out of wounded pride than need. Careful, woman. Zeke moved a step closer, his shadow swallowing the space. You'll speak different under my roof. His tone was a blade drawn slow, the edge gleaming. One of the younger settlers, too drunk, too foolish, lunged in a half-hearted rush, knife flashing. Before Miriam could even cry out, Zeke had him disarmed, his revolver pressed beneath the boy's chin. The move was so fast it seemed less motion than inevitability, a grim truth unfolding. The boy's eyes went wide, his breath ragged. Miriam whispered, her voice cracking like fragile glass. "Don't." Zeke's finger lingered on the trigger, the weight of it pulling not only on the gun but on him, dragging him toward a man he had fought so long to put to rest. His jaw tightened. For a moment Miriam saw it, that abyss yawning in his eyes. Then, with a grunt like a man tearing loose from a snare, he shoved the boy away. The revolver lowered. Mercy, unexpected, filled the air heavier than death would have. The barn was silent but for the boy's gasps. The others stared, shaken. They had expected blood, and the absence of it unsettled them more. Mercy was unpredictable, harder to understand than violence. Zeke holstered the gun slow, deliberate. His eyes lingered on Miriam's face, reading the plea there. She had asked him to spare, and he had obeyed. The bond between them glowed faint in that silence, fragile but fierce. The leader found his tongue again, though less steady now. "You can't keep us here with fear alone. Sun comes up, things will look different." Zeke's gaze fixed on him, unblinking. "Sun comes up, and you'll wish you walk away tonight." The words settled like a sentence. The settlers muttered to each other, pride sparring with instinct, but none dared make another move. They huddled in their corner, every glance toward Zeke a reminder what shadow they had stumbled beneath. Miriam remained beside her husband, though her body shook with the release of tension. Her heart carried a fresh weight. Not only fear what the men might do, but fear what Zeke might become again if pushed. She remembered the tales she'd heard before she ever knew him, of a man who had left whole towns trembling. She had never wanted that man, only the one who whispered of planting peach trees, of building something more than graves. Yet tonight, the barn brimmed with ghosts. The land itself seemed to remember. The rafters creaked like old bones, and the wind outside howled to the cracks, as if echoing every sorrow that had ever passed this way. The settlers settled down again, their sleep shallow, broken by murmurs and the rustle of straw. Pride would not let them flee into the night, but fear kept them from challenging Zeke further. The tension became its own prison, binding everyone in the barn to wait for morning. Miriam sat with her back to the wall, her eyes never leaving Zeke. He stood like a statue, his revolver still heavy at his side, his jaw tight with restraint. She saw the storm in him, barely contained, and prayed dawn would not force it to break. Outside, the horizon began to pale, the first hint of day bleeding into the black. Miriam's heart sank with it. Light would not ease the night's danger, it would sharpen it. These men would not leave quietly when morning showed them their shame. They would return with rage, with weapons, with the certainty that pride must be defended. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes, whispering words too soft for anyone but God and the earth to hear. Words for mercy, for strength, for another sunrise not drenched in blood. Zeke stood unmoving, watching the shadows stretch thinner as dawn threatened. He could feel it, too, that the quiet would not last, that the day would demand a price. The barn, heavy with silence, waited with them. Dawn bled across the horizon, thin streaks of fire on the edge of a sky still heavy with night. The prairie woke slow, every blade of grass catching the light, like the edge of a knife. Miriam stood at the barn's threshold, her breath fogging in the chill, her heart steadying itself for what she already knew. The settlers had not slunk away in shame. Pride had tethered them close, and pride would bring them back. Inside, Zeke holstered his revolver with the same care a priest might set down a cross. His silence pressed harder than any vow. Miriam studied him in a half-light, the way his jaw set like stone, the tension coiling his shoulders, the weariness that clung to him as if each ghost of his past weighed a pound. He was a man built for endings, and the day ahead demanded another. She wanted to tell him to leave, to let the barn go, to let the men take whatever they thought they were owed. But she knew he would not. The land was theirs because they had carved their life into it, inch by bloody inch. To surrender it was to surrender themselves. The sound came first as a murmur, hooves crushing frost, the metallic clink of rifles being readied. The men had returned, their silhouettes growing clearer through the morning fog. For riders, grim in the new light, faces hard with drink and shame, weapons in hand. They dismounted a stone's throw from the barn, boots crunching the soil with purpose. The leader stepped forward, his voice ragged but bold. You had your chance to be generous. Now we take what we need. Miriam's breath caught, but she did not move aside. Zeke stepped past her into the open, his figure framed by the rising sun. The light struck his face, etching the scars and set his mouth into something unyielding. His hand hovered near his revolver, not yet drawn. His voice carried calm steel. You'll take nothing. Walk away now, and this ends here. The men laughed, though uneasily. The youngest spat at the dirt. You ain't got the numbers anymore, old man. Zeke's gazed in waver. Don't need numbers, just need truth. For a moment, the prairie held still, the air, the earth, even the birds. Then the leader gave a sharp nod. A rifle cracked, shattering the silence. Dust burst at Zeke's feet. The standoff broke. Gunfire roared, echoing across the open land. Zeke's revolver leapt into his hand, answering in thunder. Each shot was measured, clean, without waste. One settler crumpled into the dirt, his scream cut short. Another stumbled back, grazing fire drawing blood, but not ending him. Horses bolted, rearing at the chaos. Miriam ducked behind the barn door, knife clenched white in her grip, though it splintered above her as bullets tore through. Zeke moved like a man waltzing with inevitability. Every draw, every shot was an old muscle memory returned. The legend of his name lived in the air, in the men's growing terror, as they realized he was exactly who they had feared. Yet each trigger pull cost him. Miriam saw in the set of his shoulders, the weight dragging at his soul. He was defending her, defending their life. But he was also becoming that man again, the one who had left a trail of bodies like markers in sand. One settler charged with a shotgun, the blast rocking the barn wall. Miriam cried out as with splinters tore her arm. Zeke spun, faster than thought, his bullet striking true. The man fell heavy, silence rushing in behind him. The last of the boys, trembling now, raised his rifle not at Zeke, but at Miriam where she crouched. His hand shook, but desperation steadied his aim. Time slowed. Zeke's revolver lifted, but the angle was wrong, the breath too short. Miriam surged forward, knife flashing, slashing the air between her and the rifle's barrel. The boy flinched, and that heartbeat was enough. Zeke's shot rang out, the sound final. The boy dropped, weapon slipping from his hands, eyes still wide with the disbelief of dying. Then the prairie was quiet again. The storm burned out. Only the pant of horses and the ringing of ears filled the space where chaos had been. Miriam pressed her hand to cut on her arm, blood soaking her sleeve. Zeke reached her in 2 strides, his hand steadying her, his eyes frantic in a way his face refused to show. "You're hurt," he rasped. "It's nothing," she whispered, though her voice shook. She looked at him, at the revolver still smoking in his hand. "But you—" He followed her gaze, saw the gun as if for the first time. His hand trembled. He holstered it slow, as though bearing a piece of himself he wanted never to unearth again. His chest rose heavy with the cost. The barn bore its scars, holes torn through its sides, blood soaking its floor, but still stood. Dawn broke fully then, golden light pierced into the wounds in the wood, painting the interior in fractured rays. Miriam looked around and thought it almost holy, the way the morning shone through damage, turning brokenness into stained glass. Zeke sank to one knee, the exhaustion of years catching him all at once. Miriam knelt with him, her hand cupping his cheek, grounding him. His eyes, storm-tossed and weary, met hers. "I'm tired of blood," he said, voice raw. She brushed her thumb against the skin, steady as the earth. "Then let this be the last." The words held more than hope. They were a vow, spoken into the dawn, binding them to each other and to the land that had nearly swallowed them. Zeke closed his eyes, leaned into her hand. For once, he let himself rest. When they rose, they did so together. They stepped through the barn door into the light, hand in hand, shadows long behind them. The prairie breathed again, the wind softened, as if the land itself had granted them another day.